So with that kind of prompting from the beginning of perfectly timed. I don't know if that means a cocktail hour is coming later or what, but with this prompting for the beginning of the reading from the Dave Fleming book, that vision, having a vision at the beginning of what is our life all about, what is our work all about, what is the love that drives our lives and our hearts, and what is the nature of that love that God has for us, that lays out a path before us. And it made me think a little bit of the beginning of the spiritual exercises that you might be familiar with. At the very beginning, the spiritual exercises, as you might know, it's kind of a retreat manual, basically, of how St. Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuits, when he had his own kind of conversion that was a gradual, ongoing sort of conversion after that wounding at the Battle of Pamplona. Does everybody know that bit? Right? Sounds familiar? Okay. It took a while, right? He's just experiencing life. He was not a devout young man by maybe any stretch of the imagination. But life happened to him, suffering happened to him, solitude happened to him, and in the course of that, he was forced into paying attention to what's going on in his own heart and in his own desires, and especially having that solitude when he was kind of plucked out of serving at the king's court and being a soldier and all these kind of snazzy activities to be involved in as a young man who kind of fancied himself to be something like a knight, right? He's more concerned about his heroism that he's going to be unfolding in his career and gaining fame and whatnot. Well, all of a sudden that all stopped, and he was forced into a place of solitude, and he was forced into being with his own thoughts and with his own feelings, not by his choosing, as he's recovering in the castle there at Loyola. And I think I start with that place of solitude because I think it's interesting. Just a side note, when I teach at the other SLU, I always, it's interesting. 100% of the time when I tell people I work at SLU, even if I say St. Louis University, they always think of this place. Whatever that's worth. Yeah. It's good for our humility down on. So when I teach the intro to theology class, and this is also, I learned this from Dan Finucane, Sr. Dan Finucane Jr. was teaching here earlier. But those intro to theology classes, one of the first exercises that we have the students do, their first homework really, is to totally unplug. To spend 30 minutes somewhere alone. No phone, no music, no books, no ways of contacting anybody, no nothing. Just sit. Sit in the church, sit in the grass, lay in a hammock, whatever it is. Don't do a thing for 30 minutes. And just experientially, as a person, right? Stop for 30 minutes, don't do a thing. And then write a little one-pager after that and describe what happened to you. What happened to your insides, right? What happened in your mind, in your thoughts, in your heart, in your spirit, whatever it is. And the responses are really interesting, because I think it says something about where we are in the culture. And it's not just them, it's us too, I think, right? It's very interesting the things they come up with. At the very beginning, some of them will say they were never able to get calm. They felt, the most common thing is they felt nervous and guilty that they were not doing their homework, when in fact they were. But they weren't getting things accomplished. They weren't achieving. They weren't going to their next meetings. These kids are unbelievably busy. And some of them can never settle down in those 30 minutes. Some do settle down a little bit, and occasionally some of them will write about, all of a sudden I started to think about some things that I'm grateful for. They started thinking about maybe their family or a girlfriend or boyfriend or friends, just good things, good people, and they become grateful. They just kind of, when they're in that solitude, just some gratitude starts to come up, and they kind of realize there's good stuff happening in my life, right? And by the way, none of this is like a spiritual exercise, although it is. It's just a human experience of solitude. These are the things that come up. I can never settle down, or maybe I get grateful, and then I also start to have regrets. They start to beat themselves up about something they screwed up recently and messed up in a relationship, or something they did, or regretted something. So those kind of things, it's interesting. Just on a very human level, that's what happens. When you have solitude, and that's why a little bit of that solitude, it really goes a long way, because the things that come up to the surface are the things that need to come up, right? Just on a human level. And the stuff that does come up, even if it's uncomfortable, if it's some kind of regret or shame about something, or nervousness about not accomplishing things, well, all of those things are something to pay attention to, right? In the way of kind of Ignatian spirituality, to pay attention to that, what is it that God is saying, hey, look here, right? Whatever it is that came up into your heart, into your spirit, look there, that's important. If it's gratitude that came up, that's great. Stay right there, right? If there's some kind of regret about things, it's okay. It's got to be dealt with, though. But it's important. If it doesn't come up to the surface, then there's no way of ever really paying attention to deal with it, and so on. So anyway, Ignatius has that experience over several weeks and months, really, recovering. And he starts to pay attention to those different desires that are coming up, and the competing desires that are coming up. And he notices, as you probably know the story, but just briefly again, this is the kind of origin experience of Ignatian spirituality, I think, in his life. On the one hand, he starts to think about, when I recover, I'm gonna next time we're really gonna stick it to the French, even though they got beat that first time at Pamplona. I'm gonna be more heroic on the battlefield. I'm gonna gain more fame. The king's really gonna notice me, and I'm gonna move up the ranks, and so on. And then he also talks about how he's going to woo this one particular woman, but he doesn't say her name. And some speculate that he's thinking about maybe something like the Queen of Spain. That would also be a good way for the king to notice you, I guess, if he pursued that path. So these different desires and daydreams about the future get him fired up, get him excited. Can't wait till I recover and get after that path that I was on. I'm going to do it even better, the path that I was on. He gets excited, but then he notices that he empties out after that. He feels sad and discouraged and empty soon thereafter, just on a human level. Whenever I think that way, after that train of thought, I just feel empty. So he just notices it. And then he has another set of daydreams. Since there was nothing better to read, his sister-in-law gave him A Life of Christ and A Lives of the Saints. He wanted something more like romance novels, but his sister-in-law had a better idea. She gave him A Life of Christ and A Lives of the Saints. He starts reading these stories, and he starts to find himself within those stories, and he starts to think, what if I did that? What if I just gave up all of this where I am right now, on the track, serving the king and so on, and in the castle? What if I gave up all of that and lived a life of poverty and just serving God and humanity? And he said he noticed, just on a human level, following that daydream, that got me fired up too. But the difference is he stayed fired up. His heart, his spirit, his desires remained hopeful for the future. He didn't just bottom out soon after those. So day after day after day after day of experiencing those two basic trains of thought, it occurs to him, I would rather be happy than sad. Maybe it's a good idea to kind of follow that other track that leaves me hopeful and full-hearted, big-spirited, and instead of discouraged. And he discerned that the one train of thought was coming not from God, and the other one was coming from God. So I guess I'll just basically go that way. I mean, that is a really simple human experience that was had because he had the solitude that was forced upon him, and he just started to pay attention interiorly to what's going on. Well, I think there's a big need for some of that solitude in each one of our lives, and a big need for it certainly for your children too, and in every generation that's coming up. And it's really, really, really tough to carve out a little bit of that space where just you're not producing anything, you're not achieving anything, you're not gaining any awards, you're not getting new A's and making new discoveries all the time, right? Just stop and do nothing once in a while, right? And even as a family, how often is that the possibility? What are the possibilities of just having some space where there's no agenda whatsoever, right? Where nothing is being accomplished, nothing is being achieved. Carve out that space, but the thing is, it maybe is a little bit scary to do that because you don't know what's going to come up, right? You don't know what's going to start percolating up in our desires and in our hearts. So it's a little bit of a dangerous thing to do, to allow some of that solitude and quiet happen in our lives. And it certainly was for Ignatius. He ended up on a very different track than what he thought he was going to be on, right? But it was another different kind of adventure that the Lord led him on because of paying attention to those simple desires. And so those basic human elements of a little bit of solitude, pay attention to what's going on in my thoughts, how are those thoughts affecting my spirit, my heart, where is it that I'm ending up anxious and fearful, and then where is it that I'm ending up free and generous and wholehearted, big-hearted, and the basic idea is go for the wholehearted path, right? And whatever it is that's leading me into the anxieties, into the worries, that's just not of God. There might be 1,000 good reasons to entertain all those thoughts, but it's just not of God, right? Period. If it's leading to anxiety and worry and fear, that is not of God. That is of the devil. That's what Ignatius would say. It's of the evil spirit. It's of the enemy of our human nature is how he calls Satan, how he calls the devil. The enemy of our true human nature leads us into fear, anxiety, defensiveness, worry, all those things, where we get small-hearted, right? And lashing out at other people, making judgments about things, and so on. It's just not of God, and it's not what we're made for. It's just not the kind of hearts we've been given, right? The kind of hearts we've been given are the kind of hearts that are made for relationship, made for love, made for hope and faith, and so on. So, at the beginning of the spiritual exercises on a retreat, and after Ignatius went through that whole conversion process, he just started jotting down notes about what's going on. What does he think he's learning from God through all these things? And anyway, that becomes the spiritual exercises. The very first thing that he has a retreat to do, a person making the retreat, is at the very beginning, step back, and it's more just sort of a consideration. It's a kind of a big picture vision of what's life all about. And as it might be familiar to some of you, he says, basically, we are made for union with God. Period. That's the whole point of every single one of our lives. We're made for union with God. We come from God and we're going to God. Right? That's what our life is for. Right? And everything else in the face of the earth, all the relationships that we've got, the skills that we have, the jobs we might take up, the different activities we have, whatever it might be, everything else, including all of our relationships, are there to be helps toward that end. Because the only way to get to God is to live this life, this concrete life that we're in, right? It's not a way of escaping the world. It's live the exact life that you've got, and at every corner, it's possible that this relationship, this activity, this occupation, whatever it might be, could be a way of getting closer to God and loving more. Loving God and then loving the people around me, right? All of it is potentially a pathway to God. All of it also is potentially a hindrance, an obstacle. Along the way, we have a lot of good things that happen, right? Good jobs and educations and activities and experiences and so on. Lots of good things are going on in our lives around us. Any single one of them, it's not those things' fault. Here's the inclination we have. We have a way of latching on to say, this is really good, and I'm not letting this X go, whatever X is. I must have this in order to keep being happy, right? And then I pretty soon, once I've latched on, once I start clinging to whatever it might be, I start to get defensive. What if I lose this? Then I start to get paranoid, right? and I get nervous, and I have this, but that other person has even more of that, and then I start comparing, and then I don't have enough, and it's the grasping, the clinging to what is good in our lives that becomes those very same things that were a pathway to God now become the obstacle to God, right? And it can go for our profession, it can go for how much money I'm making, how many friends I have, the esteem of other people, what do other people think of me, how well my kid is doing, right? Ooh, that's a good one, right? That's the one where, there's some nodding, yeah, right? I am trying to raise a good kid, and I'm with all these other parents that also have all these good kids, and some of these parents seem to be doing better than I am, right? Their kids seem to be smarter or more generous or more polite than my kid is, and I start to get nervous about that. I want the best for my kid, obviously, right? I want everything to work out well. I want him to use all the gifts that he's got. We've worked hard to bring him to a place like this, right? We've worked hard to teach him good manners and how to be disciplined and generous to other people and to share, and those are all obviously really good desires. And it happens along the way that we have the tendency to say, this is not going the way that I wanted it to go, right? This kid is off the rails, right? And then if we're honest, maybe not you, but some might start to say, this means that I am, especially if my whole identity is tied up with being a mom of this kid or a dad of this kid. If this kid is not working out the way he should be, that means maybe I'm a crummy mom. Maybe I'm a crummy dad, right? And then I'm kind of more and more conscious of what the other moms and dads are out there. What are people saying about me? It obviously sounds so petty, but it's, I think, maybe totally true, right? I mean, I'm not speaking from direct experience, but maybe I caused this kind of thing for my folks, right? These are very real. That's where it hits home, right? Of course, it also plays out in the professional world, the workplace, and so on, but that's less interesting, right? It's a lot more potent, these sorts of things, when it gets closer to home, right? How am I doing? The thing that I want most, it's a holy desire, it's a good desire to have. And then it's also the case that the evil spirit has a way of getting at all of us to get us to latch on, to cling, to succumb to fear and anxiety and worry and so on. And there's a million good reasons for it, no doubt, right? Right? But it's all for naught, right? It's all a waste. It's all a waste of attention and energy in the interior life. We're cooperating when we get into that place of clinging and grasping and into a place of fear and worry and anxiety. We are playing right into the evil one's hands, right? Taking what's even the most holy thing in your life, those relationships that are closest to you at home, and letting that become a place of division, of hardness, of small-heartedness. That's insidious if you think about it, right? The most important relationships that we've got can have a way of becoming our greatest, maybe, downfall. And so I think paying attention to those sorts of things on a daily basis is super helpful, right? And to be honest about these kinds of things on a daily basis. You know, back to what I was saying before at the beginning about the principle and foundation of the spiritual exercises, when Ignatius says, we are made for that union with God, everything else can either help us or hinder us to get to that end. We got to be paying attention on a daily basis. We would do well to pay attention on a daily basis. What is it that I'm grasping onto, latching onto? Where am I not free? And then what's happening in my life on a daily basis where things really are free, where I'm just kind of in the zone. I'm really being attentive to other people, caring about other people, listening, interested in other people, spending myself in a good way where I'm not even really conscious of myself. That's kind of a neat thing to think about at the end of a day, and I'll get into that a little bit more with that examen. When is it that when I am unself-conscious? Or when is it that I am self-forgetful? I'm not even paying attention to myself. I'm just there. I'm just in it, right? I'm just living. When am I like that? And then also, when do I slip into the becoming extremely self-conscious, either about myself or my family or my accomplishments or whatever it might be? That's a pretty good kind of barometer to pay attention to those things. When am I forgetting myself? And then when am I very self-conscious? Even if there's good reason to be worried. I mean, I understand there's a lot of reasons to worry about things, right? But when do I start to get taken over by those thoughts and feelings and so on? And if I'm doing that on a daily basis, that's the big picture at the beginning of the spiritual exercises is we're made for that freedom, we're made for that love. Sometimes I get latched onto things. So the thing to do is to pray for indifference, what Ignatius calls holy indifference, which is not to say apathy, but it's something like, okay, here's all the goods in my life. Here's everything here's my life in my hands, right? And I want to keep living with these relationships and skills and talents and accomplishments and so on, the esteem of others. I want to live my life on a daily basis like this. Right? Easy come, easy go, right? I'm grateful for the things that are here, but I don't need any of them to be loved by God, to be worthwhile myself, right? I can use the things that are here for good. And then when do I start to latch on? Say, Lord, I'll trust you on all these things except this part, right? I'm going to control this part, right? I know how to raise my kid, right? You stay out of it, right? Or whatever it might be. We all have something that we say, you can have it all except that bit. I'm going to take care of that, right? And sooner or later, that bit is going to become exactly the place of your anxiety and fear and worry, I think. It's just inevitable, right? So always called on a daily basis to that greater trust, that greater kind of surrender. And Ignatius says even when it comes to things like, if that's true, if I can have some semblance of that indifference, then, whether it's I have wealth or poverty, whether I have the esteem of others or I experience humiliations, whether I have good health even or bad health, whether my kid is really doing a bang-up job and making us proud or making me ashamed, no matter what it is, I can have that sense of indifference about things. If I can have that indifference, because all of it can be an avenue, even when things are going badly. If I'm experiencing bad physical health, if I have a loved one who's experiencing great suffering, nobody wants that. Nobody wishes that, obviously. It's also the case that those are the times sometimes when we can become we become more loving as a result of it. We become more compassionate. When the trials that maybe you go through with your kids, and the hard times especially, there's more called out of you, right? There is more compassion, more patience, more trying to understand, right? You're just different as a result of those. You become, in some sense, more human, especially by the ways that none of us would wish on anybody else. That just works that way, right? So all of these things, we can have a sense that potentially, even though I don't want any of it to be happening right now, especially if it's the bad stuff, potentially this might be the way that God brings us together, both with Him and maybe in the family too. Maybe the family gets much stronger as a result of difficulties that go on, right? That you wouldn't have ever planned for or wished, but somehow maybe you become a saint actually exactly that way, along that path, right? Not in the path that you want, but in the path that's given, There's a holiness that we're all called to, and it's a holiness of just being able to love, right? when it hurts, especially. So there's something about that big vision. What am I really here for? We're made for love. I come from love. I'm made for love. I'm made for that freedom. All of the things on the face of the earth can either help or hinder. And so I want to choose the things that are helping me along the way. But even the stuff that I would never wish upon anybody else, even that can be part of the pathway toward holiness and toward greater love within the family. And somehow, I think somehow God uses exactly those things that are painful sometimes to bring everybody closer to Him, potentially, right? It's exactly some of those sufferings occasionally that work like that. So a little bit of that, paying attention on a daily basis to what's happening, and also where is it that I'm not free? You know, where is it that I'm not free on a daily basis? And I think that's the kind of thing that happens, hopefully at a place within the educational enterprise at places like this. You know, the place like this, they offer a gazillion different kinds of experiences for your boys, right? And in some, hopefully they fail along the way too, right? That's good. That can be good. Right? Lots of nodding. Some vigorous nodding back there. Even, yeah, that's okay. That's more than okay, maybe, right? They can stumble along the way, and how is it that the Lord kind of asks you all to be there for them when things are not going well? Maybe those are the most important times, actually, the most humanizing times and the most sanctifying times in the midst of even some of the stumblings along the way. It certainly was the case for Ignatius along his path. So just to dig in just briefly into that examen prayer that maybe could be a good takeaway for you. Examen meaning having kind of a review of the day. And even if this is like 5 minutes at the end of the day, just take a little bit of a moment to recall that we're in God's presence, just kind of like what we did this evening. Just kind of quiet down for a little bit. It's all over. Whatever all of the busyness of the day was, it's over. And I'm just here. And God is gazing upon me. God is gazing upon me in love, right? And He appreciates your labors to make His love known in the world, especially for your kids, right? Let God kind of confirm you in the way you are laboring to offer that love. And to start with some gratitude, even zeroing in on a couple quick little tidbits of something that happened today, and real concrete too, like the cheeseburger I had with Jeff Pitts today. Right? I would be grateful, and Jeff Pitts. I'm also grateful. I'm also grateful for Jeff Pitts. Sorry, but little bitty things like that. Get real concrete, so your heart is kind of disposed to be opened up to know God's been doing something today. It felt like I was doing everything, but when you get into this place, that little bit of solitude, you kind of realize, okay, actually God's been doing a lot. It hasn't all been on me, right? So I have a little bit of gratitude there. And then to pay attention to what were the feelings of the day, to do a little kind of inventory of, again, when was it that my heart was getting bigger and free and generous? And where did I have joy? When did I have a good laugh with somebody? When did I see something beautiful? Just pay attention to those things. And you don't have to go into super great depth. What are the first few things that hit you as you recall the day? And there's some surprising things. Sometimes the gratitude, we forget, actually. If we don't take a little bit of that time, we don't make the space for the gratitude. And then our hearts can become, if we're not taking that time to allow the gifts of the day to impress themselves upon me, the day starts to become just one damn thing after another. It's a grind, right? If we're not pausing for a little bit of gratitude. So our hearts get bigger. We start to see things a little bit differently. And then I also see some of the things where I have regrets in the day. Why did I say that? Why did I lash out like that? Why was I say that nasty thing about, why was I gossiping? And I'm embarrassed. There's some things that I'm embarrassed by when I look back in the day. That's okay too. You don't need to get sunk down in that, but it's okay to register it, right? Why do I keep kind of falling into that little pit of gossip or whatever it might be, or judging other people, or in whatever way it might be, casting aspersions, even if it's in my own mind? Why do I keep doing that, right? If I'm doing that on a daily basis, it might become clear, like there's something to pay attention to underneath that. What's that all about? What is that kind of insecurity in my own life, in my own heart? Where is that, Lord? Then you got something to talk to God about. I don't know why I'm like this. I don't know why I get petty like this, Lord. And then take a little bit of more, and a different kind of prayer. You can have a little chat about it or write about it a little bit. I don't know why I keep getting petty like that. Maybe it's not to do with those people out there. Maybe there's something in my heart that needs a little healing or attention, you know. So that basic kind of inventory of the day, bringing it up to the surface, super helpful. Get some of the gratitude going. You also get some of the places of regret. That's also helpful, because there's some, you know, the stuff that we do that cause us shame or regret. I bet it has something to do with latching on too much to something. It has something to do with that lack of freedom. That's why I'm kind of lashing out or making those judgments and so on. And then you got another day to look forward to, right? And it gives perspective too, right? If I'm doing this on a daily basis, I'm not going to get taken down in all this regret and shame about screwing something up or doing something the wrong way, because this is one day. Now tomorrow I got another day, and I'll give it another shot then. Maybe I've learned a little bit of something. Maybe I can handle some of those challenges a little bit, a bit more simply. Hold all these things that are still important to me, but kind of hold them a little bit more lightly, right? It doesn't all depend on this one thing or this one experience or this one relationship. If I'm praying on a daily basis like this, I also start to get some perspective about a lot of stuff is changing too, right? So I made one mistake. Maybe I said one wrong thing that did not help the relationship with my son, right? Or maybe he said one thing that really hurt to you. That's one day, right? There's a big, long history kind of unfolding. If we're paying attention on a daily basis, I think all of those moments, especially some of the more painful ones, maybe we get a little bit of perspective on it, right? Maybe. I think that kind of way of praying a little bit can help give that a little bit of sense of perspective. I don't have to hold on quite so tightly to the expectations that I've got. And above all, I know I'm not doing this by myself, right? I don't have to do any of this by myself. Like, really, you know? It feels like maybe you do. It feels like maybe, especially as parents, it feels like everything is on you, right? That's not true, right? That's not true. God is assisting, right? God is laying out these kind of pathways. God is putting other people into your lives for some support. Step back a little bit once in a while and realize you're not in this thing alone. You're being assisted, right? And I can take a little bit of encouragement from that. So I don't know, maybe do we have a little time for conversation about that? Any kind of questions or thoughts come up on anything there? Anything you'd like to pursue? Yes, please.
So you're saying it's okay at night if I have my cigar and my scotch and think about God for a half hour?
Absolutely. That was an easy question. Yeah.
No, it's a good time, to relax, at night and do.
I'll give one little pushback there. The question was, sorry, so it's okay, just as for the camera purposes. So it's okay then to take time at night, have a cigar, a little scotch, and think about God, right? Is that so? Asking for permission for that, right? Yeah. Permission was granted, and then one little bit of a pushback. Thinking about God does you very little good. Does us very little good. I mean, we do it in theology classes, that's important, right? It is important to think about God. But when it really counts, don't think about God. Talk to God. And don't think about God like in the third person. Him. I wonder what he thinks about what I did, or I wonder if he's as angry at these people as I am, or don't, not the third person, not him. It's you. Speak to God as you. It sounds like a petty thing. It makes a big difference though, you know? Lord, how do you think I'm doing? That's a nice prayer. How do you think Am I doing okay? Ask him that. I'm trying. How am I doing? Ask him that. Ask him like ask God open-ended questions like that. How do you think I'm doing? Really, seriously. He's going to be way easier on you than you are on yourself, guaranteed. Right? Those kind of open-ended questions. Am I doing okay? Right? Anyway, so that speak to God in the second person, you, and thinking about God's okay, but it's when it comes to tough stuff, it's going to get you nowhere. It's going to make it worse, I think, maybe. So, anyway, was there another one? Yes, please.
And asking sincerely for help, specific help, because it's our most important relationship, and he always answers if we have that connection with him.
Yeah.
Because that's the most divine thing that we have.
Yeah.
It's not materialistic, it's that spiritual part, and that's what Ignatius
Right.
and all his study brought to light.
Yeah, right. Asking for help on the daily basis, and this is really important. And it's also true, though, that the kind of help you want maybe won't be given. Probably, maybe 100% of the time, even. The kind of help we want from God, we tell God exactly what needs to happen, right? It's okay, like, try that, but don't be surprised if it doesn't go down exactly the way you want it to go down, because God's God, I'm not, right? The presence, the care, the love, the support, the encouragement will be there. I will get through, and more than just get through, I will thrive. I will become more human. I'll be more loving as a result of the things that are happening. But I'm not maybe going to get the help that I think I need, right? Mutual friend of ours, Phil Cook, another Jesuit, he has this line, a good friend of mine. He says, let's see, I'm trying to remember. A lot of times when we ask God for stuff, we say, Lord, give me X so that I can do Y, basically, right? Give me the patience that I need so that I can keep being a good mom, a good dad to this kid, right? Give me X so that I can do Y, which is a nice prayer. Maybe a little more helpful prayer, though, is, Lord, help me let you run this. Help me let you run this situation. Because there's still something in that other prayer of help, give me this thing this virtue that I need so that I can continue to run things the way I want them to run, There's still some ego in there. And still, I want to control stuff, right? I'll admit that I need a little bit of assistance, Lord, but once you give me that, once I make that withdrawal, I'm going to be on my way, and I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. And that also doesn't work all that well over time. Much harder prayer, but I think maybe more fruitful prayer is, help me let you do it. And I'll try to cooperate, but you are running it, not me. Right? That's a tough prayer, but I think it really is genuinely a more fruitful one. Yes, please.
I start 9 in the morning, asking God. I just say, surprise me.
Nice. Morning prayer, surprise me. That's excellent. Yeah. And God hears your prayers every day, I bet. 100% of the time. That's awesome. Yeah. Wow, that's
It's short and sweet.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, please.
My sister and I just had this conversation about working towards surrendering and just letting God heal everything that needs to be healed or cleaned up in your life, and then how the ego gets in the way because it wants to consume all the time. I need more, I need to be better, I need better friends, and how there's always this kind of mind battle that goes on when you get too locked into your ego, and how you just want to consume everything, and to pray about surrendering, to let God do what he needs to do for you.
Right.
So in the Ignatian practice, what is his reflection on that? We just had this conversation today. It's really funny that you brought up the ego.
On kind of dying to the ego
Yeah.
thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, the basic, well, maybe most foundationally, it's that principle and foundation thing that I was talking about before, the vision of everything. My whole purpose, I would not be here if God didn't will it. So I came from God and I'm going to God. That's the whole point of my life. And if my ego starts to become stronger than that ultimate end, then things are going to go badly, right? It's going to get in the way, my ego. But I'm a real player too, though. So, right? It's not to wipe out the ego. It's to pay attention to the gifts that I do have, but they're always coming from God, right? They're always coming from God. And so I think that has a way of, when you're doing that, paying attention or allowing, like genuinely putting yourself at the beginning of the day, surprise me. I know this is your whole place, right? And so you surprise me. I'm going to try to be receptive, to what's happening. That's the ego is kind of shut out of there, right? Or the disordered kind of ego. Maybe one other quick little meditation that I think is pretty important within the Christian life, basically. But in the baptism of Jesus, talk about this a lot. That scene where Jesus gets baptized in the Jordan before he ever begins his public ministry, up until then he hasn't done a thing. And he's 30, he hasn't done a thing, right? Just think about your kids, right? He hasn't done a thing, and then he goes for whatever reason to the Jordan that day and gets baptized by John. And we get a little glimpse of it. When he goes down under that water, he surrenders, he's got nothing. Jesus has nothing at that point. He's left his family, he's not up in Nazareth anymore, he doesn't have the disciples yet. He doesn't have a bank account. He doesn't have any, he's got zero, right? And he's in the river. He surrenders himself. He empties himself and he comes up and he hears the Father say, "You are my beloved Son, and in you I'm well pleased." You are my beloved Son, and in you I'm well pleased. That's who you are. That's your identity. That's the only thing you need to know, is what Jesus hears there. And that's it. He doesn't give any other instructions from there on. But that's the beginning of the mission, right? The only thing that he takes into his mission, the whole rest of the gospel, all the way to the cross and beyond, is, I'm the beloved Son of the Father, right? Well, it's the same for us. As when you're baptized into that relationship. You are my beloved daughter, and in you I'm well pleased. That's what God says to you. You are my beloved Son, and in you I'm well pleased. Period. That's the only thing you need to know. Right? At the absolute core, no matter what you've screwed up in the past or will screw up in the future, at the core of who you are is beloved son or daughter of God. And sometimes when we try to pray with that or hear that, that sounds really good. I would like to hear that, right? It's interesting when we try to pray with that, so myself included, when I try to hear those words, really hear them in prayer in my heart, I start to come up gradually with some other version, well, thanks, Father, for saying that, but actually, you don't really quite understand the situation because I'm a real schmuck, and I'm petty, and I'm jealous, and and that sounds like a humble thing to do. It's actually not humble at all. It's telling God he's wrong. You don't understand. And so it takes humility, genuine humility, to let God say that to you, to each one of you. And it's ultimately what you're trying, basically that's what being a parent is about, ultimately, is to get your kid to hear that, maybe. That's one way of putting it. To get your kid to hear, you are my beloved, and in you I'm well pleased, period. And from then on, it's covered. You'll screw stuff up and everything, but that's who you are. Right? Yeah.
So I was going to jump in there. I have kind of a follow-up to that because I'm a Protestant. So for us, forgiveness comes without any kind of strings attached. We don't go to confession. We don't have all of that. So I see in the examen that we look toward tomorrow, and maybe that's the sort of moment of forgiveness in there. And I see that there is that understanding of see what love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God, and you are my beloved Son, as maybe an understanding of forgiveness. But is there an element of forgiveness in this? Because if you're holding on to that petty and grasping at those things that keep you from being on the way to that end with God, part of that letting go is understanding that the things that keep you apart from God need to be forgiven. So where do you find that?
Yeah, I think that's both. I mean, for one thing, God is offering that forgiveness all the time,
Right.
on a
I mean,
daily
there's the
basis.
atonement, and that happens once.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and it's built in that there's a kind of a repentance. I'm sorry, and there is forgiveness coming our way on the daily basis. And I can believe that intellectually.
Exactly.
On the gut level, on the heart level, on the human level, it's a lot harder to let that in from God, and then also for myself to let go of things. That's, of course, that's the really maybe hardest part, right? And one thing I like to think about or like say sometimes on things like that, and it has to do with that meditation on the beloved son, beloved daughter.
Right.
Like when we start to say, okay, thanks God, but that's not exactly right, you don't get it. We're telling, and I know what a jerk I am. I know that I'm not going to let go of these sins. Actually, in a weird way, remember we were talking before about we want to like hold back something that I want to control. Sometimes I want to keep controlling and holding on to the regrets that I've got, my shame, right? And my unlovability. I want to hold on to that in a weird way. And that, now I lost track of thought there.
Forgiveness, the need to
And
be
how do I let it go? Yeah, so I can say, no, my sins are bigger than that. I just don't deserve to be forgiven. And then I kind of like to say, like in the confessional sometimes or in spiritual direction, it doesn't matter what you think. If you don't think you're deserving of forgiveness, who cares? You don't count, actually. Right? God's the one who does the forgiving.
Right.
So listen to God.
It's
Quit
hard when you
thinking
don't
to
hear it,
yourself
though.
about and making judgments about yourself to yourself. It's totally attractive. We all do it. But I think that's a kind of a helpful way to just sort of interrupt that. It does not matter what you think. And it doesn't matter what I think. It only matters what God thinks.
So it's implied.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yes, please.
About indifference, that we need to achieve that indifference in order to come closer to God. I think it's easy to do that if you're a Jesuit priest, for example, or a monk, or old monks used to isolate themselves in a mountain for years. They didn't talk, they didn't have any contact, any relationships. Are there examples of achieving this by married people, by moms, by dads, people who go to work and deal day to day with this, life? I mean, I almost envy you because you are a Jesuit priest. Because I think I will never be able to achieve that indifference for mainly the reason about worrying about the children.
Yeah.
Or,
Right. Yeah.
so how do we do that? As
Yeah. That's good. I'll also say, I'm not an example of any of this, right? I'm not. I'm just trying to say, like, this plays out in every
No,
person's.
not you. It's just a
No, I know. No, but everybody's got something, whether, no matter what state of life you're in, it's the same human tendencies that are there that can lead us into grasping on to holding on. I want to be, when I first joined the Jesuits, we talked about this, we were all competing with each other about who's going to be the best. Unconsciously, you're just constantly competing. I'm going to be a better novice. That guy's a better novice than I am. I'm probably going to fail. And all. It doesn't matter what state of life you're in, whether you're a 12-year-old or an 80-year-old. Everybody's got the same kinds of temptations, the same kinds of things we kind of want to latch onto, and we all have the struggle of trying to let go and to surrender and to trust. I think it's just human stuff that we're talking about. I think I've gone over too long here, right? We want to end up with we have a parent testimony or something. So anyway, thank you very much. All right.